All right, well, I'll kick it off and then we can get rolling. So thanks everybody. Good morning. Thanks for joining us for our second webinar in the series focusing on cookies and some of the data privacy changes that are coming up. Again, my name is Matt Borrud, Marketing Innovation Administrator at the Idaho Department of Commerce, Idaho Division of Tourism. I'm really excited about our presentation and our presenter today. So again, before we get going, a couple housekeeping items. Please be mindful of your mic and your mute button. We will be mindful for you on this end, but let's please keep ourselves muted. Again, we will have plenty of time. Hopefully we'll have time for questions and answer and that time toward the end. So if you have any questions, you can use the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom, or let me know. I'll be monitoring as well. We can read the chat. We can unmute folks to ask, talk, discuss. So please, feel free to make sure we're engaged, and we've got plenty of opportunity for Q&A. For those of us joining for the first time today, like I said, this is the second webinar in kind of this multi-part series each Thursday for the next few weeks. We want to invite you to join us each Thursday, kind of learn and discuss this really interesting and important topic. Last week, our good friend Hannah Shute from Madden Media gave us a crash course in cookies. And so, as Hannah had presented, some of these cookies have been a long and important tool in measuring campaign performance and analytics. However, with some big changes coming up, particularly with Google, understanding what these changes are going to mean will be very, very important for our digital media campaigns, first-party data strategies, and other elements that are affected by some of these adjustments. So this week, we are incredibly fortunate to have Dave Goulden, Vice President of Product at Sojourn, leading our presentation and discussion today. Dave is an ad tech industry veteran, having led product and client development for some top digital marketing and technology firms. Prior to Sojourn, he led client and product development roles with recognized tech and media companies such as OneMarket, Conversant, Zuberance, Claria, and Intuit. And Sojourn has been an incredible partner of Idaho tourism for a number of years. I mean, they are a pillar partner of ours. Whether we're talking co-ops, whether we're talking ROI measurement, I mean, data, Sojourn is there for us at every turn and has been for years. So we are very grateful for that partnership. Very grateful for Dave taking time out of his day to join us today. For our travel council members, I see we've got a few folks on the line here too. Dave has also graciously agreed to spend a few minutes with us at our travel council meeting in February as well, to make sure that we're all kind of briefed on this. So if council members have questions now or questions, we'll have an opportunity in February to spend a few more minutes with Dave to kind of talk through some of these things. So everyone grab your coffees. Remember to submit your questions using the chat function. Dave, thanks so much for joining us. We'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Matt. I guess it's going to be coffee and cookies this morning. And thank you so much for letting us come here today. So I'm Dave Goulden, as Matt said, VP of Product for Sojourn. I've got a few other Sojourn team members on here with me. And I'm thrilled to be here. I absolutely love Idaho. I have spent a lot of time in Idaho. My wife and I have dear friends who moved to Boise about 30 years ago and raised their family there. And so we've been out many times, been to Sun Valley with them. They have a place up in McCall, been there a bunch of times. And now I have 2 kids at Boise State and possibly a third on the way with my youngest has another year to go in high school. So big connection to Idaho for me. So it's great to be here. So I will share my screen. I've got a few slides, and as Matt said, throw stuff in the chat. We definitely want to make this interactive, especially this is a series. So apologize if I'm kind of covering stuff you've heard. If there is stuff that is redundant for you, just push me along and we'll keep going. But it is a big topic. As Matt said, I've been in ad tech for about 20 years, a lot of gray hair from all the changes that happen in ad tech. It's actually one of the reasons I like it and have stayed in it is it's very dynamic. You're always changing. And so, this is just the latest chapter of change, and every step of the way, the ad tech industry responds with, with new solutions and ways to, drive, highly relevant targeted advertising, which is what online's all about. And then also the measurement as well, to be able to measure the impact of those ads. So today's session, there's a little bit, Matt kind of gave you this Sojourn. We work with DMOs, tourism boards around the world. We're focused on understanding travelers, and we do that through a bunch of data partnerships. So we have thousands of data partners that allows us to see what's happening, what travelers are doing, where they're searching, where they're booking, build a history over time with them, and we bring that to bear for really just 100% focused on travel marketers. So destinations are huge for us, as well as hotels and attractions. So yeah, today's talk will really focus on, more than anything, things you need to do to adjust. We'll be a little bit about kind of setting the stage, what really is happening, and then most of it is like it is literally what can we do both to maintain our targeting, but also importantly, and especially for you all, to maintain your measurement, because understanding the impact of what you do is very important. So kind of jumping right in, as we all know, right, the cookies that we use today, which are called third-party cookies, and I'll explain that a little bit just to make sure we're all clear on that, will really not be available sometime late next year, in the second half of next year. And this has started a few years back. Apple was the first to set the Safari browser to default to reject these third-party cookies. Now that Chrome, which is about 60% of the market, is going to do it, that essentially means that the vast majority of web browsing will not have this third-party cookie, and so we have to get ready for it. So now is really the time to deal with it. And just by way of explanation, and this has come up in other talks I've given, there's a lot of people that the browser deals with, and kind of the simplest explanation is that there's a first-party cookie. That's the one that each site uses for within its own self. So the example I use is, like, I'm a Prime member for Amazon, like most of us, but when I go to Amazon, it remembers that I'm a Prime member. It logs me in automatically. I don't have to log in every time. It's the fact that they keep a cookie, a first-party cookie, on me, and a cookie is really just an ID for me. So it's just an ID. And that lets them recognize me and show me a personalized experience every time I show up. So now the difference between that and a third-party cookie, and I'll switch over and use Visit Idaho site as an example. So if I go to Visit Idaho, your site could do the same thing as Amazon. You could remember that I was there, and then change your content based on the fact that I've been there before. But you can also reach out and talk to other websites through code that you embed in your site. Often called pixels or tags that sit in your site. And so sites use this heavily, right? I mean, you have products from Google, the Google Tag Manager, to help you manage all the tags that are sitting on your site that are calling all the different advertising and analytics services that your site uses. Well, the browser considers that a third party because, me as a consumer, I went to Visit Idaho. I didn't go to Sojourn, right? Or Google, right? So Visit Idaho is calling out to Sojourn to let us know that there was a visit, and we use a third party cookie to do that, right? So it's, again, just an ID, so we drop that third party cookie that lets us start to build that profile. So now we know that visit happened at Visit Idaho. We might see stuff, visits happening at, at hotel sites, at OTA sites, at airline sites. that's letting us paint a picture for what this person is looking to do in terms of travel. It also lets us connect up and serve that person an ad when we see them in a place where advertising can be served. And so what's really gonna so kind of to put that in context, if you will, around the different types of targeting that are available, that cookie or that consumer ID has essentially been the backbone of what we call addressable targeting. This is, we know, it's anonymous. I don't know who, name, address, who the folks in our database are, but I have a profile on them. I'm specifically targeting that profile with advertising. So this site retargeting is an example of it, right? Someone comes to your site, they leave, you find them in other places, you retarget them. That's an addressable ad. So that we're gonna, is really the thing that's impacted the most by this changeover, right? And then the second type of targeting is really emerging now, and it's called cohort targeting. Cohort is where you're basically targeting a group of people. You don't know the individuals within that group, so hey, we know these are travelers. We're going to target travelers, but I have no access or visibility into who was targeted. And that's kind of also true on the measurement side. It's not there's not a direct measurement of I served an ad, now I'm measuring what happened on the back end because I don't know who I served the ad to. So an example of this, which is actually literally just changing this week, is that Google came up with a concept of how to manage these cohorts and how to make them available to marketers, in an advertising, in the advertising ecosystem. And this is so new, right? Google's first attempt at this was the thing they call Flock. They just switched that over. They just announced this week a new thing they're calling Topics. Same concept. It's a group of people. They're essentially, Chrome will watch our browsing behavior. It'll determine, right now we're interested in travel. It'll make that signal available to advertisers, again, not knowing who the individuals are, but just knowing I served an ad to someone who has been browsing, about travel, recently in the last couple of weeks. So this is a space that we're watching closely. We're going to take part in all the early tests that Google is doing in this to see, what kind of efficacy we can drive with cohort. But that will be, another way to target. And then we also have keyword and contextual, right? This is bread and butter. We've all been doing this for a long time. This is not changing. In our view, it becomes just more important, right? So as addressable advertising will still be available, and we'll talk about how and why it's available, but it'll be more challenged in some ways. And so, we are shifting some of our emphasis and some of our media dollars over to keyword and contextual to help make up for that. And that, keyword, of course, is, we're targeting based on the word that someone searched on. Contextual is I'm viewing content about travel. So I'm on a travel website. Think of Expedia. They, not only is it an online travel agent, but they're a media website too. There's lots of ads there for all kinds of stuff. That's contextual. You don't need to know who the consumer is. You're targeting the fact that they're, interacting with travel content at the moment. So any questions on this? I'm happy to pause for questions. Okay. So one of the things to note is that what's changing over is that instead of using a cookie, we're going to shift over to using an email address as the ID. And it's going to be what's called a hashed email address, which is just a form of encryption. Hashing is encrypting an email address so that it just ends up becoming kind of a set of letters and numbers that, don't look like an email address. They can't be, reverse engineered back to an email address. But it is a persistent ID. So if Sojourn uses, we all use the same hashing algorithm that takes my email address and turns it into the same, code, which then becomes an ID for me as a person. And we'll talk more about hashed email and why that's important. But one of the key pieces is what's on this slide right now is that, we spend most of our time as consumers in environments where we're logged in. And just about always that login happens with an email address, right? So, and then, the environments I'm showing here are all the places where we consume ads typically, right? So we're 90 to 95% of the time we're in places where we're logged in and we can see an ad. So today, if I gather a booking, if I see a hotel booking happen, consumer gives their email address. I could log, make that part of the profile, and then I could load that onto Facebook, and I could target them on Facebook because I'm, that person's always logged in on Facebook when they're using it, and I could, serve them an ad based on the fact that they had just booked a hotel room, as an example. And so this hashed email has been used by major ad systems like Facebook and Google for years and years, and will become more and more important. And what we're seeing is that the rest of the ecosystem, essentially all of the web websites are now, if you go to most, news or content sites now, they're asking you to log in at a minimum, to be able to see their content for free. And then, then you've got subscription services and all the rest. So, it's going to become more ubiquitous for websites to be asking for logins, especially where they're giving away free content. And that's, to keep them connected. I saw this happen in retail a long time ago. So in my 20 years of ad tech, the last 10 before I got to Sojourn, I've been here for 2 years, but the last 10 were focused on the retail vertical. And there, we were working with online advertising, but we're in a place where 80% of the sales were happening in a store. So we had to connect up. First off, we wanted to target people that bought things in store online, and we had to connect up the digital marketing to the in-store purchases, and that was all through an email. So it was the hashed email. So you see retailers getting super creative, pretty much everywhere you go now. Hey, would you like your receipt over email versus a piece of paper? That's for convenience, but it's also for getting tracking. And that's been a big tactic. Every retail website you go to, first thing you see is a little pop-up. Would you like 10% off your next order, to subscribe to our email newsletter? So, we're talking to all of our partners and advertisers and saying, start thinking about that. If you don't already have a loyalty program, if you don't already have other incentives, those are things you need to start thinking about. Okay. So we think about it as really 3 pillars to being able to continue to do addressable advertising, right? So cohort will emerge in whatever shape it does. Keyword and contextual will be really important, but in the realm of addressable, which is a lot of what many of us do, these 3 pieces will be important. We talked a little bit about hashed email, that essentially becomes the new identifier instead of a cookie, right? And then first-party cookie IDs, which we also talked about, will also be important, and that acknowledges that consumers don't log in every time or don't always have a reason. We're going to do our best to create incentives, but in those cases where they don't log in, you want to try to as often as possible associate that first party cookie ID with a hashed email. So I'll give you an example. Hotel website, I go there, I book, go there today and I book a room. I give my email address. Basically that site can be dropping a first party cookie on me, and that will still happen. And then I gave my email address when I book. So now we can associate those 2 things. We can say, oh, this first party cookie ID belongs to this hashed email, and they're both part of the profile. They're both part of the identifier. Now, let's say I go back 2 weeks later, and I'm planning another trip. This time I just do a quick search. I don't log in, I don't book. Well, the first party cookie ID is happening there. And now we can associate that new search for that new trip back to my same profile, because previously I had logged in. So that means it just kind of reduces the friction for being able to continue to collect data that can build on that profile without having the consumer log in every single time. Right, so that's kind of the second piece of it. And then the third piece is historical booking data, which doesn't apply to you directly, but just know that folks like us are collecting this data to make your advertising, to keep your advertising still very targeted. And so what this looks like is in addition to kind of picking up the website activity again, I'll keep using that hotel example. We are doing this now. We take in their offline historical bookings, the transactions. And so this can come from any channel, right? It could be someone called up their call center, called up, booked on the phone, could be even walked up and made a reservation live in a hotel. Those typically, those transactions will make their way into their customer database. And then we have an ingestion system that ingests those in a batch mode every day. So, for the previous day, and we can also go get a history when we start up with a customer, get the last couple of years worth of transactions coming in. And so that, again, like every time I book, I'm giving my email address for that confirmation email. So that allows us to see all those bookings that are happening kind of offline, and gives us, gives a broad view of what's happening both online and offline. So with all of these, we spend a lot of time making this really easy for our partners. Like our tags are already set up to do this, really easy to pass it through. Typically the CRM systems that hotels and attractions use, really easy to port their data over, push their data to other systems like ours. So, typically, a data update their tags, maybe a few days to program in the booking feed, and then they're off and running. And so over the last, couple of years, we've been, making this transition, already anticipating it. And so we're probably about 3/4 of the way through. We've still got partners that, need to get, the tech upgraded or whatnot. And so that'll happen, but we feel really good about by the time the cookies do go away, we'll be in a place where you can still do, the vast majority of what we do. So there are some interesting benefits of this. So cookies today are, they're browser-based. So that means, I use 4 different devices. I've got my work laptop, my home laptop, my phone. My wife has an iPad that I use a lot. If I'm planning a trip and I'm kind of jumping around between devices, everyone has a different cookie on me, right? And so my, that trip or, my travel behavior just kind of gets broken apart. Now, in that same instance, I log in all those devices with my same personal email address when I'm booking something. So now, if I'm using hashed email instead of cookie, I'm one profile. So that allows a much bit more rich view of each person, as well as it allows better measurement across these different devices, which I'll talk about in a moment. So that kind of sets the stage. It's just changing the identifier. The thing that will be more challenging is the retargeting, because you got to get a login in order to gather that data in the first place. So, to the extent your website's kind of totally anonymous, you will not be able to do retargeting. And so you start to have to think about, well, what am I going to do? So one of the things that we're talking to folks about, and we're actually talking to Matt about this right now, is start to pull together data among participants, among people who have a common interest. And so, we've for a long time hosted co-op programs that to drive co-marketing. Those are typically not pooling data; they're just pooling marketing funds and using whatever data is available. But we do see a big opportunity to now start to combine this up, especially for you all, in that your hotel and attraction partners have they have the data that is relevant for both targeting and measurement, and we think pulling it together is really interesting. So that's something we're going to be developing. We've got a proposal now to have you guys as a pilot with us on that, be one of the first to do that. And then the other is think about the channels. As we talked about, search and contextual becomes more important. So if you look at channels like meta search, a lot of social pieces like in video, like those are ones where, again, people are logged in. We have the best chance of reaching them. It's definitely something you want to be thinking about is that channel mix. And then think about how you do the targeting, right? So again, what with folks who have a database already established, use that database. It's good, that database is typically around an email. As we all know, email open rates are terrible. They're getting worse. My kids at Boise State, they don't even know what email is. It's, if it's not on Snapchat, they're not going to find it. So you gotta find consumers where they are. So if you leverage your database, you can then, with this new hashed email as the tracker, you can now find them on all these channels we talked about. Of course, contextual and cohort are going to also be important. Cohort, we'll figure that one out. Like there's a lot of people that are unsure how effective it's going to be, but it'll be something new. In all of this, we talked about this a little bit. I won't hit on it too hard, but we now open up opportunities to have better synchronized creative across devices for a consumer. If we know that we're targeting the same consumer across different devices, we can really now make sure our creative is aligned. We might rethink our creative strategy a little bit as it relates to I'm now I can tell more of a story too, right? I might be thinking about how do I synchronize that story, because now I'm talking to someone over 2 months as they're planning their trip, and I know what to say. I can be more confident that I'm reaching the same person over and over. And then again, this is kind of another way to look at the fact that we're marketing to people now and not devices, is that the measurement becomes a lot better, right? If you're watching something on streaming, if you're now interacting with your desktop, I can know that I served you an ad in one place. I can know that you went and visited a website, of course, on a different device. I can even measure offline. I can say, you saw an ad on Hulu, and then you called up a hotel and made a reservation, right? So the measurement becomes a lot more precise. And the insights become more interesting. So one of the things we spend a lot of time doing is just, with our data, not only do we do ad targeting, but we try to give a feel for what's happening in your destinations. Like what does the upcoming demand look like when we're seeing kind of forward-looking searches and bookings into your region. Again, those are, today largely cookie-based. As they become people-based, we'll have more accurate view of, how far in advance are people really searching before they book, right? Today we see that if it happens on the same device across both, but now we'll have a more holistic view of it. So, in terms of kind of insights, analytics, and measurement, everything is going to get stronger. And that was really kind of the key pieces I want to talk about. Again, totally happy to answer whatever questions you have. It's a big topic.
No, that's great, Dave. Really appreciate that. I think from the advertising perspective, the ad tech perspective it's fascinating. And the one thing I wanted to ask you, it just as, we've researched this, or as I've researched this, as you read, about this topic, you get this term, kind of the term, the walled gardens, right? And you've got, some of these big properties, and, I think you kind of alluded to an Expedia to a degree, but, I think about, and you had some of those folks on, some of the channel slides and some of those other, some of those slides where you think about like a Facebook, but talk a little bit about that concept of the walled gardens and why that, may be important, or, will it continue to be important? I mean, I know, looking into the crystal ball is tough, but,
yeah.
Talk about that concept a little bit, because I feel like that's a term that's being thrown around a little bit as maybe an answer to some of this, and would love to learn more and what your perspective is on that.
Sure. Really, the three companies that get most often referred to as the walled garden would be Facebook, Google, and Amazon, right? And the thing that's common among the three of those is that they have huge direct relationships, huge audiences, huge, amount of direct relationships with consumers, a logged in direct relationship, right? And so what they've done over the years is they've, both for competitive and, somewhat for privacy reasons, they have walled off their ecosystem, right? So when data goes into we can load audiences onto Facebook and target within Facebook, but we can't pull any data out, right? So it's kind of, once it's in there, it's there. Even like the measurement, some of the measurement is very restricted to, what they show you, like, versus, being able to get a log of who we served ads to on Facebook. We don't know who we served ads to. We can know, did they come and do something afterwards? But, if we served 1 million ads, only Facebook knows who they got served to. So those are elements of kind of walled garden. Now there's some good things about that, because they do have a lot of data. Like, think about it, Google. Google has a lot of data on consumers that is actionable within Google because of that. Amazon too. We're in a pretty deep discussion with Amazon. They have some kind of interesting travel data. It's not as travel specific as a search or a booking, but you can see people's purchases over time, and you can say, oh, this person just bought a bunch of travel guidebooks. This person just bought a bunch of luggage. Like, you get some real insight into some, who might be a heavy traveler by what they buy on Amazon. And so, those are typically kind of the assets that make them powerful, but also what they protect, right? So they wall that off, in part, so that people aren't taking that knowledge out and using it somewhere else, right? So the trick is, how do you interoperate with these walled gardens? Because you can't avoid them, right? You cannot, there's so much time spent on Facebook and Instagram and on Google and YouTube. Like, if you avoid, if you ignore them, right, you're going to miss out on reaching consumers. So you got to figure out how to work with them. And so kind of our approach has been, let's create this layer on top of these walled gardens, and let's synchronize the audiences we push into them, right? So that, while we may not have complete visibility of what's going on in there, we know, all right, hey, we do things like, we'll score consumers. We score consumers based on their likelihood to buy something, to book a trip, where they're going to book, but also which channels that they are more responsive in. So if we know there's a set of consumers that are looking to travel, the Sun Valley, and we know that these set are really way more responsive on Facebook, we'll push those ones to Facebook, and that's where we'll target those ones. We know others might be more responsive to a video ad on YouTube, so all right, we'll push those there. And so it's really kind of, how do you kind of synchronize across them? Because one thing is, if you're trying to reach the same audience in all those places, like, you kind of lose control over how much frequency you're serving. Like, you could be serving 10 ads in Facebook and 20 over here, and it might be very inefficient. So you have to kind of think about it. And then what's left is the open web. Like, the open web is still massive. We all use it a lot. And there, it's typically way more transparent about what's happening. Like, when we serve an ad on the New York Times, we know exactly who we serve the ad to, because we get a log, the log of the impression back. So we know we served that ad. It makes measurement a lot easier. So, it's kind of like, how do you combine all that up? That's the trick.
Well, I think what you just touched on there is kind of where my mind was going next too, because when you had that slide where you're talking about kind of those web properties where you got, CNN and ESPN and, BBC and all those different groups. And then that concept of layering. And so if I'm on Chrome and I'm logged into my personal account, but I'm visiting CNN and I'm not logged in, if we're buying ads through Google and we've got our data connected up with Google through that ad buy, is there connectivity there? Or like, when you talked about, where CNN or somebody's going to be pushing for us to be logged in, with our first party data, if we've got somebody who's opted into a, Visit Idaho email, or, opted into, to our first party data, would we, is just having it through a Google ad enough? Or, how is that going to work for those publishers in that open web?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I'm going to put Google aside for a moment, because they're a little complex in how they've said they're going to handle that. But some of the other big players in the open web, and we work with most of the bigger players, but there's a company called Xandr. They used to be owned by AT&T and then just got bought by Microsoft, but they're a big ad tech player in the open web. And through their platform, we could load audiences using a hashed email, and then they have connections to all the publisher sites like the CNN. And so what, and this is how it works, how it works today with a cookie is kind of analogous. Like we have our cookie, we have to kind of synchronize it with Xandr, who is the ad server in that case, and they kind of synchronize with CNN. So we all kind of synchronize our cookies so that we know when that, when the person hits the CNN homepage, that slot on the top, every ad slot, it's an auction and it's real time. So CNN pings, a bunch of different folks, including Xandr, and they say, give me your bid and how much you're willing to pay to place this ad. We win that, and we all will bid based on who that consumer is. Like if it's not someone we recognize or we know, we're targeting for a campaign, we won't bid. But if it is someone we know, today we know that because these cookies are all synced. Basically, everyone's plumbing in hashed email as the new thing. So CNN will pass up the hashed email to Xandr, to all the bidders. They'll all look and they'll go, oh, this ID, I get it, and I'll make that response. So Google, their big system, it's called DV360. It's their open web ad server, and what they've told publicly and what they've told us privately is that they don't plan to support alternate IDs like hashed email. So they're going to do contextual advertising through there. They're going to do these cohorts that they're working on, but it's not clear that they're going to support kind of the retargeting and the other things that we're going to do off of hashed email. But interestingly enough, they're going to use hashed email. They're going to continue to use hashed email within their own ecosystem, which they do today for YouTube and for, you can do that. You can use your audiences on search as well.
Interesting. So they're going to use it for their own properties, for their own benefit. But then when it comes to anything that's out in the open, they're not going to use it, so that there's less benefit to those folks in the open. It drives us more to buy more from Google, basically. Like
that's what they've said. There's antitrust, there's all kinds of stuff involved that they're trying to work it out. But that's the funny thing, like this whole thing started with Apple, right? Apple's not really, they have and actually interesting enough, they do have a pretty big advertising business, like all the latest things Apple's been doing to shut down the, to have consumers opt into advertising within apps on iOS. It kind of does the same thing for them because they have a huge advertising business all about app downloads. When you go to the App Store and you search for an app, like there's a lot of sponsored listings there. That's all through Apple's system. And, they're making sure that, right, it's, they're kind of making sure they have an advantage there versus kind of, an open ecosystem for advertising within apps. So, this whole thing started with Apple, Safari, other moves they made, and it was kind of squaring off against Google and Facebook. Ultimately, it is better from a privacy perspective, but I think, privacy was only part of the driving force for all these changes.
Dave, I have a question for you kind of on that topic of advertising, and something from the agency side that we've been noticing is that with all of these changes and things getting a little bit more strict as far as targeting goes, do you think you're going to be seeing pretty high increases in cost per clicks and CPMs because everyone has to go through all of these different hurdles now as advertisers to be able to get you an actual targeted click? What are you seeing from the Sojourn side?
Yeah, it's probably too early to paint any trends yet because this transition's not, it's not kind of completely done yet. But what I can go back in history, this predates my time at Sojourn, but when Safari started blocking third-party cookies, we actually saw the reverse. We saw that ad inventory prices went down because, they generally went down for publishers because a lot of ads that were getting bid up because of known targeting, all of a sudden they couldn't. So now it just became kind of general ads on the site that were replacing that. So as an overall market, like the market will probably go down a little because of this. now, for people that still have a profile, they've invested in the tech, it's possible that that becomes more competitive. My sense is it's probably going to be a little less competitive in the beginning because there's going to be people that are slow to make these changes. So the people who are on top of it are probably going to get some leverage in the beginning, because they jumped in first, and so they're essentially have less bidders to compete against. But as everybody tools it up, it'll kind of come back to normal, I think.
That makes sense. I think that's the opportunity I'm seeing right now, is that we may be able to steal a year or two if we can get on this sooner. And like you talked about, kind of the concept of pooling data and making sure that we're all dialed from a first party data perspective, and looking at all these different ways we can get as much high quality data as possible. Can we steal a couple years of competitive advantage because we get this going faster than some of our comp set, some of our neighbors, some of the if we can I feel like there's a real opportunity there for folks if we're on the ball with this.
Totally agree. And I think the other thing we're telling our partners now is that there's benefit today in doing it, even ahead of Chrome making the changes, because when you're connected up, who do you get? You get all the Safari users back, which you didn't have before, right? So that's, we love that. And those, by the way, I mean, all the data we see shows that, folks using more expensive phones and more expensive, iPads and Macs, they index higher to travel. They just do.
I think you'd mentioned it earlier, and I think we touched on this last week as well, that, this really, I think in the end, really is a good thing. It's I think it's there's going to be adjustments,
yep.
A little bit of pain, probably some, less measurement, less visibility than we're used to, but in the long run, this is a really good thing. And, I think that as we've looked at our partnership with Sojourn over the years and take a minute and sort of explain a little bit about like the origins of Sojourn to a degree, because I think that's a really interesting back half to this equation of the relationships that you all have had from a data perspective with airlines, with hotel chains, and how we've been able to kind of connect some ROI and some different travel metrics through our relationship with Sojourn that is I think ultimately going to be strengthened when we work out all these kinks and we figure out what this is going to look like. I think Sojourn has a great opportunity to really be, to be a leader in this, but talk a little bit about those origins, because I think that's very interesting in the whole concept that we're discussing.
Yeah. I mean, at our core, at our founding, we really have always been focused on data, and we've always been focused on travel. And so, when Sojourn was founded, it was out of Omaha, Nebraska, of all places, but for a tech company. But our founders there saw something interesting happening and this was a dozen years ago. So this was kind of before cell phones took off in the way they have, and smartphones took off in the way they have. Back in those days, we were all printing out our boarding passes. That was the innovation. So we didn't have to go wait in line. We printed out our boarding pass, and they were looking at that piece of paper and they're like, hey, there's this little boarding pass, but there's a lot of white space here. Let's put something there that's interesting. And they created essentially an advertising network to place ads on those boarding pass pages. And that came through, partnerships with a lot of airlines. As a matter of fact, American Airlines is one of our early investors, back in those days. And so, as we all got phones and we all stopped printing and we started doing it on our phone, the founders realized they were a little bit out of their element. They brought in our current CEO, this is about 10 years ago, Mark Raby, who came out of early days of search business, in Yahoo Search, and then he ran parts of Yahoo Europe. So, totally understood the whole data ecosystem, how to leverage data. So he essentially transformed all of our airline partnerships into data partnerships instead of these boarding pass things. And so we've been collecting search and booking data from airlines, for more 10 years or more, And that's now expanded. So that now includes large hotel chains. It includes some OTAs. It includes some meta search sites. And so, globally, we have visibility into about 350 million consumers, on, their searches and bookings across this wide variety of sites. And so that does some interesting things for the tourism space, because you typically don't have the same richness of data to target on your own as a hotel or an attraction would, who has a customer database, and they have lots of people visiting their site, kind of considering their services all the time. And so we've kind of become that proxy for you. So we take this combined, we call it our traveler ecosystem, this knowledge of all of consumers, and that's who we're targeting, on your behalf. So we have a database. In our database, we have a list of, I don't know the number off the top, I could find it out, but how many people have booked in Idaho over the last 2 years. We could, that's your CRM file essentially. We can help you reactivate those people. We're seeing, who's booking in your competitive, markets, and go conquest those guys. So, so that's one part of how we use that big data set. The other part is around measurement. So again, because you're not driving a booking, although you do on visit, on visit Idaho, you've got a booking experience, but I think the large, majority of the bookings are going direct through or going through an OTA. And so what we use that same data set for is to connect up, the campaigns we serve on your behalf back to, some economic activity. We saw an actual booking happen. And so that connection of what the advertising did, to drive a booking, is I think what you guys look to us to do, and help you, one, optimize the campaign so that they're more effective at driving bookings, but also just prove your value to your constituents, which is a huge part of what you have to do.
No question that booking data, that action taken is so important. And so having that through a partner like Sojourn that can, not only help us run great creative and well optimized campaigns, but then tell us the story on the back end through your partnerships to say, these actually resulted in airline purchases. This actually resulted in hotel stays. That's incredibly powerful. And so I think it's like we're almost, that's sort of on the back end of the ad performance, right? And I think everything that we're talking about in this new concept is sort of on the front end of the ad performance. And so it's going to be just this much stronger continuum throughout. But we appreciate partners like you who've already done what you guys have done to put us in this, be able to put us in this position.
Yeah, you bet. And that's, I think that's what's interesting about the idea of pooling, because today, through our data partnerships and our direct relationships with hotels and attractions, in Idaho as our customers, and we see a percentage of the bookings that are happening. If we can increase that percentage, right now we can get much better measurement. So, ideal, if we can get 100% coverage, which will never happen, but that's, if we can get to that place, then you almost have perfect data about how these campaigns are working for you, right? So we want to use the pool to increase, our visibility jointly for you. And that also increases kind of your insights too. Like you're able to see, more about your constituents.
Yeah, that helps us be nimble. I mean, that's what we have to do. We're kind of a little engine that could, and we've got to use every advantage that we can to. We're surrounded by incredible marketers and incredible destinations, and it's more competitive than ever. So any edge we can get through some of this is, those are hundreds of millions of dollars in spending and economic impact that matters significantly to our economy when we do this right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Dave, this is awesome. Hannah, what other questions do you have? And we've got about 8-9 minutes. Any other questions? I don't see any questions in the chat, but if anybody wants to chime in, we certainly can. But this has been awesome, Dave. This is so fascinating, and we so much appreciate your expertise.
Yeah, no, I love to talk about this stuff. I hope I didn't geek out too much. Hopefully it made sense.
That's great.
I love it too. This is great. Well, yeah, we're going to share this. Diane, thanks for your note. We'll get this on our website, and we'll share some things. And so you know, if anybody's got any questions or any feedback or anything like that, let us know. But really appreciate the time today, Dave, and you know, your Sojourn's ongoing partnership with us. And we will be in touch. We'll hopefully see everybody next Thursday. And thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot, Matt.